Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the pitch-black corridors beneath the castle. It smells like despair, burns your nostrils, and squelches beneath your boots. You're not a knight, a bard, or even a lowly cook. Nope, you're tonight's star of the worst imaginable job, the gong farmer. By gong, we mean human waste. And by farmer, we mean a poor soul who harvests nothing but other people's business. You descend into the cesspit just after dusk. Why night? Because even the nobles, who think cleanliness means changing your undershirt once a season, don't want to see or smell this operation in daylight. You lower yourself on a creaking rope ladder, holding a weak torch in one hand and a bucket in the other. The walls of the latrine shaft glisten with something that probably used to be stew. By the way, the term gong comes from the Old English word gang, meaning to go. You're collecting the go. The waste is semi-liquid, mixed with hay, blood, and other mystery materials. The only thing thicker than the sludge is the silence, broken only by your own nervous breathing and the occasional bloop of something unmentionable falling from above. You hope that was old. Your job. Scoop out the excrement, carry it up, and haul it outside city walls. That's where you dump it in open pits, sell it as fertilizer, or burn it. Surprisingly, gong farmers were paid well. But before you get too jealous, remember, they had to live in isolated huts and were often forbidden from entering churches or public markets because, well, smell. And this smell, it clings. You've washed 3 times in the river and still stink like a butcher's bucket left in the sun. Even your dog gives you space. There's also the matter of what's in the waste. You find coins, rings, and sometimes teeth. Urban legend among gong farmers claims that a man once retrieved a bishop's lost signet ring, and tried to return it. The bishop allegedly denied it with a straight face and a twitching eye. Occupational hazards. Where do we start? Asphyxiation is a real risk. The buildup of methane gas in enclosed latrine pits can knock you out mid-scoop. One unfortunate soul passed out in a London cesspool in the 13th century and was later found floating in his own ladle. Also, you're not alone down there. Rats love latrines. Big ones. The kind that look like they rent rooms and pay taxes. They watch you work from ledges, their eyes catching the torchlight like little judgmental demons. You flinch every time one skitters too close. And here's a fun fringe tidbit: in some castles, especially in France, the garderobe, the medieval toilet, was a vertical shaft built right into the castle wall, emptying straight into the moat. That's right. The same water that protects you from invaders also bubbles with last night's stew. Historians still argue whether this was clever engineering or the ultimate passive-aggressive statement to besieging armies. So why do this? Why descend, night after night, into a pool of collective disgust? You don't exactly dream of dung as a child. But this is medieval society, social mobility is a joke, and jobs that pay coin, real coin, are rare. And besides, you work alone. No masters barking orders. No overseers peering over your shoulder. Just you, the dark, and, yeah, all that. Sometimes, on a good night, you whistle. Not because you're happy, but to drown out the squelching. Other times, you talk to the waste. Not because it listens, but because it's the only thing not judging you. One odd comfort is that everyone needs you. Lords, merchants, bakers, they all produce waste. You are the quiet backbone of hygiene. The unthanked custodian of civic decency. They don't say it, but they'd be knee-deep in their own mess without you. You finish your shift just before dawn. Your arms are sore, your back aches, and your clothes are stained with regret. You climb out of the pit, torch now a stub, and toss your final bucket into the waste wagon. A few coins exchange hands, and you head home. The sun's rising, and the streets slowly fill with yawning bakers and stumbling drunks. You walk among them like a ghost. People wrinkle their noses and step aside. No one greets you. Children point. You don't mind. After all, you're clean where it counts, your conscience. Still, you whisper to yourself as you round a corner and disappear into a side alley, tomorrow night, same pit. And for one surreal second, you almost smile, because at least you're not the guy cleaning the leeches. You're ankle deep in a squelching bog at dawn, your breath fogging in the cold morning air, your bare legs goosebumped and numb. You don't carry a spear or a sword, just a wooden bucket and a heavy sack. Your prey isn't wolves or wild boars, but something far more sinister, leeches. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands, depending on how many villagers need bleeding this week. And tonight, you're the leech collector. The job starts with a slash, your own. You make a small nick on your shin or foot, just enough to drip. Then you stand still in the shallows, letting the blood snake through the water like a dinner bell. It doesn't take long. Soon, you feel the first tug. Then another. It's like slow, cold suction. Eventually, your limbs feel as though they're being quietly drained, because they are. Leeches latch on, and that's when the real work begins. You pluck them off gently, drop them in the bucket, and try not to scream when one sneaks into your undergarments. They're wriggling, squishy, and tenacious, like the worst customers imaginable. Some bite so deep, you have to pry them loose with a fingernail or the edge of a bone comb. Others just drop off, leaving you to bleed into the bog and attract their siblings. And you know the real kicker. Doctors love these slimy little monsters. Leeches were considered practically a cure-all. Cough. Bloodlet. Fever. Bloodlet. Bad vibes. Let's bleed that out too. If you're lucky, you're harvesting for a barber surgeon with a steady clientele. If you're unlucky, you work directly for the local monastery's apothecary, who'll pay you in soup and God's grace. Here's the mainstream historical fact of the day: in medieval medicine, the theory of humors dominated. The idea was that the body had four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and any imbalance caused illness. Blood, being the easiest to remove, got top billing. Hence, leeches. Lots and lots of leeches. Now here's your quirky tidbit: leech collectors, often women or older children, would sometimes sell the fattest specimens to wealthy clients, claiming they were more experienced leeches, with better bedside manners. Imagine haggling over a bloodsucker's resume. But the hazards go beyond the bites. Standing in a marsh for hours causes trench foot, fungal infections, and open sores. One wrong step and you sink knee-deep into mud that smells like a drowned goat. Then there's the ever-present risk of fever from the murky water. You've seen fellow collectors shivering under blankets, delirious, babbling about dancing leeches and red skies. Plus, you're not the only one hunting. Eels, snakes, and storks all love this terrain. A white stork once stole your entire morning's haul right out of your bucket. It looked you dead in the eye and swallowed the leeches whole. No remorse. Sometimes you trade gossip with other collectors. You learn who fainted last week, whose legs got infected, who lost a toe. It's not exactly workplace camaraderie, but it's something. One woman swears she once found a leech shaped like a cross. Another insists hers whispered secrets. You chalk it up to blood loss. Historians still argue whether leeches were genuinely effective or just one more excuse for medieval medicine to make you suffer. Some modern studies suggest that certain proteins in leech saliva do have mild anticoagulant effects. But the real benefit may have been psychological. People felt better after bleeding. Or maybe they were just grateful to survive the procedure. Your day ends when the bucket sloshes with enough slithering loot to satisfy your buyer. You stagger out of the bog, legs striped with bite marks and stinging scratches. Your hands shake as you count the leeches, one by one, making sure none have hidden in your sleeves or between your toes. One time, you missed one. You found it 3 days later, on your eyelid. Back home, you empty the leeches into a wooden jar lined with damp moss and seal it tight. The sound they make inside, wet, sucking, slithering, sticks in your brain long after you've scrubbed your hands raw. Your fingers are wrinkled, your skin pale, and the coppery tang of your own blood lingers in your nostrils like a bad song stuck in your head. As you sit by the fire, trying to get the chill out of your bones, you wonder, who decided this was a job? Who looked at a swamp full of parasites and thought, I bet there's money in this? But you already know the answer. It wasn't a choice. It never is. The village needs medicine. The barber needs tools. And you? You need to eat. Still, as you settle into sleep, you can't help but twitch at the sensation on your skin, phantom leeches. You slap your arm, just in case. Empty. For now. Your nose wrinkles long before your feet reach the workshop. The smell hits you like a slap, sour, acrid, and unmistakably alive. Welcome to the world of fulling, where your job is to stomp on soggy wool soaked in human urine for hours at a time. And yes, it's as bad as it sounds. You arrive early, before the sun has crested the hills, because fulling is loud, smelly, and best done when fewer townsfolk are out to gag at the stink. Your tools. A pair of bare feet, a wide stone basin, and gallons of pee. No boots, no gloves, just your own wriggling toes pressing down on damp, heavy fabric that sloshes like rotten stew. The fulling process is essential to medieval cloth making. Wool right off the loom is loose and greasy. To make it thick, soft, and ready to wear, it needs to be fulled, basically trampled and beaten until the fibers tighten. And what better liquid to help the process along than stale human urine? They called it chamber lye, and it worked wonders on grease and oils. Medieval dry cleaning, if you will. Now, a mainstream historical fact, fullers were often positioned at the heart of the cloth trade. Towns like Lavenham in England or Ghent in Flanders boomed because of their textiles. Without you, there's no finished wool, no export trade, no fancy cloaks for bishops. So yes, you're standing in we, but technically, you're vital to the economy. The real indignity? The source of your soaking fluid is your neighbors. Local families contribute their donations in pots left outside the workshop. You try not to look too closely at which one Mrs. Greaves drops off each morning. And worse, some fullers run out and have to beg for more. One poor apprentice reportedly offered ale at a tavern in exchange for patrons relieving themselves right there in the barrels. Desperate times, fragrant measures. Now for the fringe tidbit, ancient Romans also used urine for fulling, and Emperor Vespasian even imposed a tax on public urinals, known sarcastically as the urine tax. When questioned about taxing something so revolting, he held a coin up to his nose and declared, "Money doesn't stink." You, unfortunately, can't say the same. Each day, you climb into the vat and begin the dance. Step, squish, twist, repeat. The cloth bunches under your soles, heavy and resistant. Your calves ache, your toenails soften, and your skin itches from the ammonia. You learn to breathe through your mouth, but the taste still creeps in somehow, clinging to your tongue like guilt. There's also the cold. The basins are rarely heated, and fulling takes hours. In winter, your legs go numb, but you keep stepping, because stopping means starting over. Some workshops rotate workers, but you drew the short straw, or maybe you're just too small to argue. Sometimes, when your mind wanders, you imagine you're stomping grapes, like those lucky winemakers in the South. You picture laughter, festivals, music. But then reality oozes between your toes again, sharp and stinging, and you return to the basin and the slow, endless squelch. You get a brief break when the cloth is ready to be rinsed. You wring out the fabric, heavier now, thick with absorbed waste, and haul it outside to dry. The sun won't kill the smell, but it helps. Kind of. Sometimes, curious dogs come sniffing. You chase them off with a shout and a handful of damp wool. Historians still argue whether fullers were more respected in cloth-producing towns or just tolerated like necessary pests. In some places, they had guilds and protections. In others, they were shoved to the edge of town, along with tanners, butchers, and your old friend the gong farmer. Your master inspects the cloth at the end of the day, rubbing it between his fingers and grunting. If it's not tight enough, it goes back in the vat. If it is, it moves on to dyeing. Either way, you don't get a compliment. Just a tired nod and a dismissive wave. You head home with your legs tingling, your skin dry and red from constant exposure. Neighbors pinch their noses as you walk past. You try to joke about it, smells like gold to me. But no one laughs. Not even the kids. They just run. At night, the scent lingers in your dreams. You smell it in your pillow, in your hair, even in your teeth. You bathe in the river and scrub with sand, but it clings. Medieval deodorant? That's called praying for a strong breeze. And here's the part no one talks about, the pride. Because as disgusting as the job is, you know the cloth is better for it. The nobles have no idea, but the robes they flaunt started under your soles. That thick green cloak the priest wears every Sunday. You stomped it into form while muttering about your aching knees. So tomorrow, when you crawl back into the vat and feel the cold climb your calves, you'll sigh, maybe curse a little, but you'll step anyway. Because even the ugliest jobs keep the wheels of the world turning. Especially the ones soaked in old pee. The bell tolls 5 times before you've even had your crust of bread. That's the signal, more bodies. You tighten your leather jerkin, grab the iron hook, and head toward the city's eastern gate. The cart you pull creaks and groans like it knows what's coming. The stench is already in the air, sweet rot, sweat, and something else. Something hollow. You're the plague corpse cart puller. Not the worst job, technically. But only because you're too numb to compare. The streets are unusually quiet. Most doors are barred shut, windows nailed from the inside. You pass a few brave, or desperate, souls tossing linen bundles into the alleyways, their eyes bloodshot and hollow. You already know what's inside. Bring out your dead. It's not just a saying. It's your daily chorus. You call it down the alleys, around corners, outside inns, churches, even bakeries. Sometimes no one answers. Other times, a head peeks out and gestures silently toward a shape slumped by the doorway. That's when you pull the brake, grab your hook, and get to work. The dead are heavy, even the small ones. Rigor mortis bends their limbs into odd, stiff poses, and it's your job to wrestle them into some manageable shape. You try not to look at their faces. But your mind fills in the details anyway. That baker's wife. That smith's boy with the red cap. A priest still holding his crucifix. It never gets easier. You heave each body onto the pile, one after the next, limbs slipping over one another, cloth soaked through with whatever fluids the plague hasn't already stolen. The wheels creak forward, weighted with flesh and silence. The cart, like you, was never built for this. Mainstream historical fact for today: during the Black Death, plague carts were often pulled by men who were either poor enough to need the pay or already sick enough that they had nothing to lose. Death was so rampant in cities like Florence, London, and Avignon that traditional burial rites broke down completely. You didn't go to a funeral, you just waited for the cart. A quirky tidbit: some cities issued plague masks for corpse handlers, not the famous beaked doctor masks, but primitive cloth wrappings soaked in vinegar or rosewater. Did they help? Absolutely not. But they made people feel like they were doing something. You've tried one. It smells like wet socks and delusion. You reach the outskirts of town by noon. That's where the new mass pit has been dug, hastily, shallow, and already buzzing with flies. The pit is lined with quicklime, which crackles and sizzles when it touches flesh. You unload the bodies one by one, trying not to slip in. One guy did, last week. Broke his leg. They left him in there. The pit didn't care. Historians still argue whether the plague carts were an organized effort or just a desperate improvisation. Some chronicles describe city officials paying men to remove corpses systematically. Others suggest volunteers or criminals took the role under duress, often vanishing days later. Either way, the records agree, the carts never stopped rolling. You finish unloading and pour more lime over the heap. It smells like stone dust and steam. You cover the pit with loose soil and mark it with a crude wooden stake. No names, no prayers. Just another chapter in a silent book no one wants to write. You lean on the cart for a moment, wiping your brow with a sleeve stiff from dried sweat. The wind shifts. You smell smoke, not far, another house being burned to cleanse it. That's the new trend: if someone dies, torch the house. Problem solved. Of course, no one mentions where the survivors go. Or if they go at all. Back in the city, a child throws a rock at you from an upper window. Plague monger, he yells, voice cracking. You flinch, not because of the insult, but because he's not wrong. You're covered in it. Your hands, your tunic, your breath. You scrub at the stains but they don't come out. Not really. Sometimes, you see the body twitch. It's the worst part. A spasm of a dying nerve, a trick of the light, or, once, someone still breathing. Just barely. You remember her face, half masked in blood. You remember shouting, waving, demanding help. No one came. You took her to the pit anyway. What else could you do? You make your last stop near the monastery. The friars have left out 3 corpses wrapped in linen. You recognize one, it's the quiet one who used to hum while sweeping the chapel steps. You mutter a half-prayer as you lift him. Sorry, brother. No funeral today. You return the cart just after dusk, bones aching, wrists raw from gripping the wood. Your master doesn't speak. He just nods and hands you a crust of bread and a half-cup of cider. Payment. You eat alone on a low wall, staring out at the river. A bat flits by overhead. Someone coughs down the alley. You think of quitting. Every day. You picture just walking away, cart abandoned, hook dropped. But you know what happens then. Someone else has to take your place. And maybe that someone won't notice when a child breathes, or a woman blinks, or a man reaches up from the heap. So you'll go back tomorrow. You'll call into alleyways and load the cart. Because the work is awful, but necessary. Because someone has to witness the end. Because you'd rather be the last kindness they see than no one at all. The crowd is roaring before you even arrive. Children are climbing onto barrels for a better view, merchants are already hawking roasted nuts and turnip pies, and someone's playing a hurdy-gurdy in a key that doesn't quite fit the mood. You, meanwhile, are walking through the back alleys of the square with a heavy axe on your shoulder, a blade that catches the sun and glints in a way you'd rather not notice. Because today, you're not just a man. You're the executioner. You don't wear a mask, that's a myth. Real executioners prefer to see their target, feel the weight of what's about to happen. But you do wear dark clothing, and you keep your hood up when possible. Not for theatrics, but because it's easier than meeting the gaze of the neighbor whose cousin you just beheaded last week. The town square is buzzing. A platform has been built overnight, wooden planks still dusty from carpenter's boots. The condemned man is already there, bound to a post. You don't know him personally, but you recognize the expression on his face, part disbelief, part fury, part resignation. Everyone thinks they're going to get a pardon, right up until you show up. Mainstream historical fact, executioners in the Middle Ages had a paradoxical role. Feared yet necessary, they were part of the legal system. Justice needed a visible end, one that sent a message. And you were the messenger, even if that message was soaked in blood. Your tools are few, a freshly sharpened axe, a small blade for last-minute rope cuts, and a pouch of herbs to mask the smell of terror, sweat and, occasionally, death. You've learned to look calm. Professional. It's part of the performance. The crowd expects drama, but also dignity. You provide both. A fringe tidbit. Some executioners kept tokens from their clients, a ring, a shoe, even a bit of hair. Not out of malice, but as a record. A ledger of lives ended by their hands. Some wrote names in hidden ledgers, others simply remembered. You try to forget. You mount the scaffold without looking at the crowd. The condemned man spits at you. You've been slapped, bitten, begged, cursed in 5 languages. It doesn't faze you anymore. What does still get you, though, is when they cry. Not loud, wailing sobs, but those quiet, trembling tears that fall without sound. The ones where the body's given up, but the soul hasn't quite caught on. You check the bindings. Too loose, and he might struggle. Too tight, and it looks cruel. It's a balance you've learned to strike over the years. You nod to the bailiff. The charges are read, stealing from the bishop, or maybe inciting a riot. The crowd boos, not at you, but at him. They want a villain, not a man. You provide closure. Neat, final, irreversible. The axe is heavy but familiar. You've sharpened it yourself, quietly, in a stone shed with no windows. It's more precise than most people think, but still requires a clean strike. You remember the time you missed by a hair and had to swing again. The crowd cheered louder. You vomited behind the tavern later. Historians still argue whether executioners were ostracized socially because of their work or whether people simply used that as an excuse to isolate them. In many towns, executioners were forbidden from sitting in church pews or buying bread at the market. But then, When a thief was caught or a heretic needed burning, suddenly you were everyone's favorite employee. You step behind the man. He trembles. You ask him quietly, final words. Some mutter prayers, others curse your name. One once asked you to sing. You declined. The swing is quick. Practiced. Final. The crowd gasps, then erupts in applause. You do not bow. You do not smile. You simply signal to the assistants to carry the body away. Another day, another debt paid in blood. You head down the back stairs, avoiding the sticky pool left behind. The axe is wrapped, the herbs retrieved. You pass the local tavern. No one makes eye contact. You smell roasting meat and hear laughter. You're not invited. Your pay is left in a cloth pouch behind the bailiff's office. You don't count it until you're home. It's enough. More than most earn. Executioners are paid well, sometimes even given free lodging or land. But no one lets their daughter marry you. A local boy once followed you home. Asked if it was cool to chop off heads. You told him no. You told him it was a job, like cleaning latrines or burying bodies. He didn't understand. He laughed and ran off. You hope he forgets. At night, you clean your blade. Not just for rust, but for conscience. You mutter names you wish you didn't know. You whisper apologies you never had time to give. And in your dreams, you stand on the scaffold with no axe, no voice, no escape. Because here's the truth they don't tell, every face lingers. Every final glance, every twitch of the fingers, every breath that didn't quite finish. You carry them all, one by one, stacked behind your eyes like books you never wanted to read. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. You wake up coughing, not from illness, but from the fine grit already clinging to your lungs. It's not yet dawn, and your shift begins in the bowels of the earth. No birdsong greets you, no sunrise warms your face. Instead, the air is thick with the bite of salt and damp stone. You're a serf in a medieval salt mine, and no matter how deep you go, the weight above you never really disappears. The mine entrance looms like the mouth of some vast, sleeping beast. You duck inside with a flickering torch, boots already crusted in yesterday's brine. The tunnel is narrow, carved by hand with rudimentary picks and the stubborn will of peasants like you. Wooden supports groan under their burden, and water drips steadily from the ceiling, each drop whispering a reminder of collapse. Salt is precious. Called white gold, it preserves food, seasons meat, and fills the coffers of your lord. That's why they keep the mines running year-round, rain or shine, feast or famine. You, however, are expendable. Your name isn't on any ledger. Just your output. Mainstream historical fact, medieval salt mines, like those in Hallion or Wieliczka, were among the most brutal workplaces of the time. Salt mining didn't just erode your health, it eroded your bones, your teeth, your will. Miners often died young, hunched and brittle, with skin that cracked like old parchment. You reach your assigned shaft, barely wide enough to stand in, and begin chipping at the wall. Salt crystals gleam in your torchlight, mocking you with their cold sparkle. You gather them in a wooden basket, which gets heavier with each passing hour. Your back protests, but there's no time for that. Now for the fringe tidbit, some ancient mines were so vast and long-lasting that they contained chapels and underground lakes. One mine in Poland even had salt chandeliers, no joke. But you won't see any of that luxury. You're in the wet shaft, the one with the warped ceiling and the rat hole in the corner. And those aren't ordinary rats. They're massive, pale things, practically translucent, like the mine itself has birthed its own species. Breathing is an art form here. You learn to exhale through your nose, shallow and steady. The salt dust coats everything, your lips, your nostrils, your lungs. You've seen old miners cough up white phlegm, streaked with blood. Some just drop one day, as if the mine decided they weren't useful anymore. The worst part? You're not even paid. As a serf, your labor is owed. Your life is part of the land's yield, just like barley or sheep. You might get a crust of bread, a splash of ale, maybe a scrap of meat if someone's feeling generous. But mostly, you get salt. On your skin. In your mouth. In your dreams. Historians still argue whether salt miners were deliberately kept in ignorance of their own value or simply too exhausted to resist. The towns grew rich, the nobles richer, but the miners died with nothing but crystallized fingers and nicknames like Dust Bone and Crackback. You work by torchlight for hours, the shaft growing darker, narrower, quieter. Sometimes you sing, quietly, under your breath. Not for cheer, but rhythm. A chant to match your swing. You sing about the sun you haven't seen in 2 days, about the wind you used to feel on your neck. You sing so you don't scream. Your fellow miners barely speak anymore. Conversations are hoarse whispers and tired nods. You pass the same faces every day, gray, thin, eyes sunken like the mine itself is slowly devouring them. Some chew herbs to ease the pain, others drink what they can find. One man insists that salt ghosts haunt the tunnels, souls of those who never left. You've seen things, too. Shapes in the dark, flickers of movement that vanish when you turn. Once, you found a boot sticking out of a collapsed tunnel, the leg still in it. You marked the spot with chalk and moved on. No rescue party. No prayers. At midday, you emerge briefly to dump your basket and stretch your spine. The sky is blinding, impossibly wide. You squint, breathe, cough, and go back in. The break lasts minutes. Time is for lords. By the end of the shift, your arms are trembling, your shirt soaked through, and your hands bleeding at the knuckles. You stagger to the surface like a mole blinking at daylight. Your reward? A nod. Maybe a grunt of approval. You limp home through the village, your body outlined in white like some ghost carved from salt. Kids stare. Dogs sniff and recoil. Even your family keeps a slight distance. You don't blame them. The mine clings to you. No matter how much you scrub, it never fully leaves. Not the smell. Not the burn. Not the silence. At night, your dreams are filled with tunnels. Infinite, winding shafts with no exit. Sometimes you wake up gasping, thinking the roof's about to collapse. Sometimes you don't sleep at all. But tomorrow, you'll return. Because salt is survival. For them, for you. Because if you stop, someone else's meat will rot, someone else's meal will go bland, someone else's wealth will trickle dry. And because, deep down, you've forgotten what it means to breathe clean air. The first thing that hits you is the stench. Before the sun has even fully risen, before you've had a bite of porridge or a sip of weak beer, you're already retching behind the tannery. The smell isn't just bad, it's ancient. It wraps around you like a curse passed down from forgotten gods. You are a medieval tanner, and your job is to take rotting animal hides and turn them into leather. Unfortunately, the hides fight back. You begin your day hauling dripping piles of skins from a cart. They've been sitting in the sun for days, fermenting nicely in their own juices. Maggots writhe inside folds of flesh, and bits of fur cling like ghosts refusing to move on. You're used to it, sort of. You still gag sometimes, especially when the wind shifts just right. But there's no choice. No tanner, no leather. No leather, no boots, saddles, belts, pouches, or armor. You are disgusting, but vital. The first task. Scraping. You lay the hide over a wooden beam called a beam shaver, and begin removing every bit of flesh and fat still clinging to it. This is done with a crescent-shaped knife so dull it feels like it hates you. Bits fly off and cling to your tunic. By midday, you look like you lost a fight with a diseased bear. And here's where things get really medieval. To soften and preserve the hide, you need to soak it in a special mixture, one involving water, dung, and most crucially, urine. Human urine. Collected from the good folk of the town, who gladly sell their chamber pot contributions to your trade. It's called baiting. The hide goes into a vat of warm pee, sometimes mixed with rotting animal brains for added effect. Then you climb in barefoot. Yes. Barefoot. Why? Because the hide must be stomped and turned. And nothing quite massages ammonia and filth into the leather like your own calloused feet. You move slowly, steadily, knees bent, balancing against the slick walls of the vat. Your skin burns. You ignore it. Fringe fact, historians believe the ammonia in urine was crucial for loosening hair and grease from hides. But prolonged exposure would have blistered skin and, over time, damaged nerves. Some tanners ended up half-numb from the waist down. Back outside, the hides are hung to dry, then rubbed with animal brains or fat to soften them. Others are smoked over fire pits that burn mixtures of herbs, dung, and whatever else you can find that doesn't cost money. This process locks in the stink like seasoning on a cast iron pan. The smell never leaves. Not your clothes. Not your hair. Not your soul. Children run from you in the street. Your neighbors cross themselves when you walk by. Even dogs hesitate to sniff you. You don't go to church often, no one wants to sit near a tanner. Your home is a shack by the river, downwind of everything. And you like it that way. At least no one bothers you. You've learned to ignore your nose. Instead, you focus on your hands, on how the leather changes with each scrape, each soak, each stretch. There's a strange pride in the finished product, supple, strong, smooth. It's easy to forget it began as something that could have chased you in a field just last week. There's danger, too. Slipping into a vat and drowning is a real risk. Breathing the smoke too long can blacken your lungs. And then there's the sharp tools, the boiling water, the furious lords demanding more saddles before sunrise. But you endure. Because your work clothes nights. Your craft binds books. Your labor carries soldiers across kingdoms. And nobody else wants to do it. Sometimes, at night, you sit by the river and dip your aching feet into the current, as if it could wash away the day. It never does. The stink clings. You scratch at the burns on your calves. The sores are slow to heal. Some never do. You remember once, long ago, you wanted to be a stonemason. Build cathedrals. Touch the sky. But stone doesn't feed a family. Leather does. You head back inside. Tomorrow, there'll be more hides. More filth. More stomping in pee. And when your children hug you, they'll wrinkle their noses and laugh and say you smell like boiled pig. And you'll smile. Because they're right. You blink through smoke and soot, eyes watering from the acrid haze as the forge roars to life. The air is a wall of heat, like walking into a dragon's breath. Your tunic clings to your back with sweat, and your arms already ache from swinging the hammer, yet the day has barely begun. You're the village blacksmith, and while people revere your work, they have no idea how brutal this job truly is. The forge isn't just hot. It's relentless. Imagine standing in front of a bonfire for 10 hours straight while lifting weights with one hand and juggling molten metal with the other. The bellows need pumping constantly to keep the fire roaring, and you do it with your foot while shaping iron with your hands. You're multitasking before that term even existed. Your hands. Blistered, calloused, and blackened. Your lungs. Let's just say coughing is your daily alarm clock. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths commonly suffered from early-onset lung disease due to years of inhaling metallic dust, charcoal fumes, and the occasional bit of scorched hair. Probably. But hey, who needs longevity when you've got glowing hot iron to wrangle? You begin your morning with horseshoes. The village lord's prized warhorse threw one yesterday, now he's in a fury and wants it fixed before his afternoon hunt. You fetch a red-hot horseshoe from the fire, shape it with the hammer, then press it to the horse's hoof. Steam bursts like angry ghosts as the iron sears into the thick keratin. The horse whinnies. You get kicked. Again. Just another Tuesday. Then come the tools, sickles for farmers, hinges for gates, nails by the handful. Every item is handcrafted, every strike intentional. You're part sculptor, part mechanic, part miracle worker. Lose your rhythm, and the iron hardens before you're finished. Now you have to start over, or risk handing someone a sword that breaks the first time it hits bone. Not that you ever say, bone, out loud around the Lord. Bad luck, apparently. Midday arrives, and your clothes are soaked through. Your fingernails are permanently rimmed in grime, and every muscle burns. You wipe your brow and realize you've smeared ash across your entire face. No one tells you, of course. It's basically your war paint now. Then there's the issue of injury. You've lost count of how many times you've burned yourself. Tiny flecks of molten slag leap from the anvil and bite your skin like angry bees. 1 minute you're hammering, the next, you're dancing backwards and yelling profanities in a mix of English and whatever curse language the forge invented just for smiths. Fortunately, your dog, soot-covered and loyal, doesn't judge. Lunch? If you're lucky, someone brings bread and ale. If not, you gnaw on something unidentifiable you left wrapped in cloth near the furnace and pretend it's still edible. There's no time for leisurely breaks. The tongs won't hold themselves. Fringe tidbit, some smiths were believed to have supernatural connections, wielders of fire, shape, and elemental change. In Irish mythology, the god Goibniu was a divine blacksmith whose tools never failed. Sadly, your tools frequently do. And no, there's no divine intervention coming when the hammerhead cracks in mid-swing and nearly takes out your apprentice's nose. You also make weapons. It's the one part of your job that gets people excited. They come to you with dreams of gleaming swords and ornate hilts. What they get is a rough, functional blade that doesn't snap when struck. But still, there's poetry in it. Watching metal glow, soft as dough, then cooling into something lethal. You try not to think too hard about where that blade ends up. And just to keep things interesting, sometimes you have to work with charcoal made from whatever wood the village didn't need for heat. Oak burns hot. Pine smokes like a demon. Your shop becomes a foggy cave. Occasionally, People wander in just to warm up, and stumble out looking like they spent an hour in a chimney. By sunset, you've made enough to satisfy your quota. Your arms feel like wet rope, and your back screams. But then someone shows up needing a new lock for the storeroom. You sigh, relight the coals, and get back to it. There's a strange loneliness in smithing. You stand apart from others, literally. Your forge is on the edge of the village to keep the fire risks low. Kids whisper that you can talk to metal. Some women say you smell like hellfire. Even the clergy approach with wary respect. You are part craftsman, part pariah, part town savior. No one wants to hug a blacksmith, but everyone wants his nails. At night, your skin feels like sandpaper. You lie down on a cot filled with straw, your muscles twitching from overuse. Your ears still ring with the echo of hammer against anvil. The world is quieter without the hiss of steam and the roar of flame, but only barely. You drift off knowing tomorrow will bring more of the same, more heat, more smoke, more sweat. But you also know that without you, nothing in this town gets built, worn, protected, or eaten. It's exhausting. But it's essential. And hey, at least you didn't get kicked by the warhorse twice. Progress. You wake before the sun and put on the same robe you've worn for a decade. The monastery bell hasn't rung yet, but your internal clock is wound tight by years of quiet routine. Today is like every other day, still, silent, stiff-backed. You are a monastic scribe, and your enemy is time, and ink blots. Welcome to the scriptorium, a long, drafty room lined with desks and candles. Outside, the world plows fields and bleeds in war. Inside, you copy. And copy. And copy. The work is noble, they say. Divine, even. Your job is to preserve the holy word, to immortalize knowledge before it fades into worm-eaten parchment. But while monks preach of spiritual reward, your spine disagrees. It creaks like an old door, protesting the hours you spend hunched over a wooden desk narrower than your elbow span. Ergonomics won't be invented for 800 more years. You feel every minute of it. Your quill is cut from a goose feather and sharpened obsessively. You dip it in ink made from oak gall and iron salts, which stinks slightly like vinegar and rots anything it spills on. Including your fingers. The parchment is made from calfskin, smooth, expensive, and very unforgiving. One sneeze, one drip of sweat, one accidental and you've ruined a week's work. May as well start over and say a few mea culpas, for good measure. The cold doesn't help. In winter, the ink congeals, and your joints freeze into claws. In summer, flies buzz around the candles and stick to the wet pages. The pages. They're numbered by hand. Mess that up, and the entire manuscript becomes a riddle no one can solve. Some monks go blind from the effort. Others go slightly mad. A bell tolls in the distance. It's prime, first prayer of the day. You sigh, stretch your cramping fingers, and shuffle toward the chapel. Every hour of your life is marked by bells, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. You write between prayers. You eat between writing. You sleep as little as possible. Joy is a carefully rationed concept, and usually involves illuminated initials. Ah yes, illumination, the one moment of artistry you're allowed. If you're lucky, and talented, you're asked to decorate a capital letter. Gold leaf is applied painstakingly with a squirrel hair brush. You mix pigments from crushed minerals, flowers, and bugs. A single letter might take 3 days. When it's done, you stare at it like it's your child. Your extremely expensive, possibly heretical child. If you're not lucky, though, you're stuck transcribing genealogies in tiny cramped Latin. Begot after begot until your brain begs for mercy. Or worse, legal contracts written by drunk noblemen whose handwriting resembles medieval chicken tracks. You wonder if they did it on purpose, just to torment whoever had to preserve it for eternity. Errors are inevitable. You invent clever ways to correct them, scraping the parchment gently with a knife, darkening letters into new shapes, or inserting a marginal note so confusing no one notices the original mistake. Sometimes, frustrated scribes leave secret messages between the lines. One wrote, "This parchment is hairy." Another, "Oh, my hand." Your favorite. "Now I've written the whole thing, for Christ's sake give me a drink." Meals are silent. Bread, beans, perhaps cheese if it's feast day. Conversation is replaced by eye contact and subtle glances. You once nearly started a war over who had the last turnip. You apologized with a well-drawn marginal doodle of a turnip wielding a sword. It's now part of the monastery's unofficial mythology. Sometimes, you get to copy tales of Arthur or Charlemagne, or bestiaries filled with lions, unicorns, and beasts no monk has ever actually seen. You enjoy those days, if only because a drawing of a pelican pecking its own chest for blood gives your tired brain something to chew on. You wonder how future readers will interpret these illustrations. Hopefully not literally. Spoiler, they will. By evening, your fingers are stained black, your neck is a knot of agony, and your eyes have developed a permanent squint. You close the manuscript gently, tie it shut with care, and whisper a small prayer that the candle didn't drip on it. As you walk back to your cell, you pass the shelf where your first copied manuscript sits. You run a finger down its spine. No one knows your name, but this book has your handwriting. Somewhere, someday, a monk, a noble, or a scholar might read those words and not know how much sweat it took to ink each one. You sleep on a wooden cot under a thin blanket, dreams filled with dancing letters and dripping ink. Tomorrow, the bell will ring again, and you'll return to the same desk, the same feather, the same prayer. Because in your small, cramped, aching way, you are preserving the world. Your name won't appear in any chronicles. No bard will sing about you. But without you, the castle falls. It's dawn. The kind of dawn that slaps instead of kisses. Mud clings to your boots before you even reach the trench. You're a ditch digger, and your canvas of choice is cold, wet earth. You're part of a crew hired, or conscripted, let's be honest, to dig defensive moats, ramparts, and drainage ditches around a half-built stone fortress for some minor lord who believes a wider ditch equals greater power. The tools, wooden shovel, pickaxe, and hands. The reward, a crust of bread and enough aches to pass down to your children. The work is as glamorous as it sounds. You're knee-deep in sludge, shoulder-deep in complaints. The ground is either frozen like iron or wet as soup. There's no happy middle, no sweet spot, just sweat, blisters, and the occasional squashed frog. Someone up top shouts about angles, make the slope steeper, or it won't trap cavalry. As if you care whether nights fall in. You haven't eaten enough in 2 days to care whether you fall in. Spoiler, you will. It's inevitable. The pickaxe is heavy. It doesn't cut through soil so much as persuade it, loudly and with many curses. Shoveling is a rhythm, dig, lift, toss, wipe brow, curse, repeat. After an hour, your shirt clings to your back, by midday, it clings to your soul. There's no brake whistle. The only rest you get is when someone else collapses. Then the overseer lets everyone stop for a moment, mostly to drag the poor sod out of the way before he drowns in his own sweat. You chew on old bread and water that tastes of leather from the wineskin. You dream of meat. Even boiled turnips would be ecstasy. Your hands blister and then those blisters blister. Your palms resemble boiled parchment. You wrap them in rags soaked in goose fat, but it doesn't help much. The ground isn't soft clay, no, it's full of roots, rocks, bones. One day you find a Roman coin. The Lord takes it. You find a skeleton. The priest takes credit. You find an old horseshoe. You keep it, for luck, or irony. Rain. You keep digging. Snow. You keep digging. War. Dig faster. Ditches must be finished before enemy scouts arrive. There's always the threat that you're just one missed shovel away from being on the wrong side of the trench when arrows start to fly. One day, an architect rides by on a horse, clean boots and smug grin. He surveys the ditch and mutters something about it being 2 hands too shallow. You clench your shovel tighter. Violence is frowned upon. Frowned upon, but fantasized about. Occasionally, the ditch collapses in the night. Rain loosens the walls. All that effort. Gone. You start over, because complaining gets you whipped or replaced. Not promoted. Replaced. The worst days are the ones where the stench rises. You're digging near the latrines or old graves. The rot clings to your nostrils like bad memories. You gag, but no one stops working. The Lord needs his defenses. He also needs people to die before the enemy reaches the walls, so the ditch is designed just wide enough for horses to break legs in and soldiers to struggle climbing out. You tell yourself the ditch will protect children. Villagers. People who matter. It helps you sleep. That and sheer exhaustion. Evening falls. Your back feels like it's been gnawed on by bears. Your knees threaten to sue for neglect. You stagger to the campfire where other ditch diggers sit, slurping thin stew and pretending it tastes like victory. Laughter is quiet, usually ironic. The guy next to you lost a toe last week. He jokes about it being his best toe anyway. You lie on straw that smells like goats, dreaming of digging ditches in hell, and realize it wouldn't be that different. But tomorrow, you'll rise. You'll grab the same shovel, stare into the same half-finished moat, and keep digging. Because ditches don't dig themselves. And fortresses, well, they never remember the hands that built them. Only the bodies they kept out. You wake up sore. Not just stiff or achy, your bones crack like splintered wood, your joints creak in rebellion. Still, you rise. Because you're a medieval tanner, and the dead don't cure themselves. You shuffle toward the edge of town, where the tannery squats beside the river like something the town planners regretted but couldn't live without. The smell hits you first. A punch to the face. Sharp, sour, rotting, a blend of animal skin, lime, urine, and something even worse that has no name but every tanner knows by scent alone. Your job. To take raw animal hides, fur still on, blood and fat still clinging, and transform them into supple leather. Boots, belts, bags, armor. All the useful things nobles use to stomp on peasants like you. The first step. Soaking the skins in water to loosen the gory remains. This vat of filth is where dead things ferment, and your arms go elbow deep in it. If you're lucky, the water's not frozen. If you're luckier, there aren't too many maggots today. Once the fur and muck are softened, you scrape them clean with a curved knife on a wooden beam, called a fleshing beam. Sometimes you nick your hand, and sometimes it gets infected. Sometimes someone loses a finger. You wrap yours in rags and mutter a prayer to Saint Crispin, patron of leatherworkers, and hope he's listening. Historians still argue whether tanners invoked Crispin sincerely or just sarcastically, in the way someone might now yell, "Thanks a lot," to the sky. You think that's the worst of it? No. Now comes the liming. You soak the hides in a slaked lime solution, basically skin-melting alkaline paste, to remove any last stubborn hairs. You stir the skins with a long stick, like some horrible stew. Your hands are red and raw. Your eyes sting. You've inhaled so many fumes you can taste chalk in your molars. Then there's the other bath. Human urine. Yes, actual urine. It softens hides wonderfully. No one really knows who first discovered this, but you assume it was the same lunatic who also figured out cheese. In some towns, people are even paid to collect their pee in jars and bring it to you. In others, you collect it yourself, dreading every slosh of the bucket. You soak the hides in the stuff and stomp on them barefoot to help the mixture work through. That's right, you're in a vat of week-old pee, massaging decomposing skin with your toes like a nightmare version of grape pressing. By now, the smell has become part of your being. It seeps into your clothes, your pores, your soul. People cross the road when you walk by. Even the beggars wave you away. Finally, the hides are dried, stretched, and softened by hand. You pull, twist, and pound them against wooden frames. Sometimes you rub in brains, yes, animal brains, to help condition the leather. There's a saying, every animal has enough brain to tan its own hide. You think about that a lot, especially when someone mocks your intelligence. By sunset, you're covered in everything that once lived: blood, fat, hair, lime, sweat, and stink. You scrub yourself with cold water and sand, because there's no soap strong enough. You don't eat near anyone. Your wife sleeps turned the other way. Your children don't want hugs. You're an outcast, but a necessary one. Because leather is wealth. Nobles want fancy gloves, soldiers need armor, monks require bindings for books. You make that happen. And everyone prefers to pretend it comes from clean shops with lavender-scented workers. You joke with other tanners, we get the skin, but they keep the glory. There's a local priest who says tanning is a sin, too close to death and filth. You ask him who made his shiny leather shoes. He doesn't answer. Sometimes, you see your work on a passing knight's saddle. It gleams, well-stitched, durable. And you feel a flicker of pride. But it's brief. Your back twinges. Tomorrow's another round of skin, stink, and solitude. You return home under cover of dusk, when fewer people can smell you from a distance. You sit by the fire. You don't eat much. Sleep comes slowly, because the scent of rot still lingers in your nose, even after a scrub. But you'll wake again. Because hides don't tan themselves. And someone has to do the dirty work that holds the whole kingdom together, literally. You wake up to the jingle of bells, not the pleasant kind, like a festival or a winter fair. No, these bells are tied to the iron collar of a man being led through the streets in chains. And you're not watching from the sidelines. You're walking behind him, holding a cudgel. Because today, you're the medieval executioner. You didn't choose this job. Most don't. Maybe your father did it before you. Maybe you were a butcher and someone noticed how steady your hands were with a cleaver. Or maybe, most likely, you were forced into it, when nobody else would. After all, it's not a job anyone wants. But it's one that always needs doing. And here's the first thing no one tells you: you don't just swing the axe. No, your duties are far more diverse. You run the whole gruesome show. Today's criminal is a thief, caught stealing a loaf of bread 3 times. And the punishment, according to the town's laws, is public mutilation. That means it's your job to take a finger. Just one. Cleanly, if possible. You escort the man to the wooden scaffold in the town square. It's market day, which means the crowd is thick and festive. Children chew apples. A merchant hawks gingerbread from a cart nearby. Because nothing says family outing quite like judicial mutilation. You try to keep your face blank. Some executioners wear hoods to conceal themselves, more for symbolic protection than anything else. But you've found that hiding your expression only makes people imagine worse. So you let them see your eyes. Not angry. Not sad. Just routine. With a practiced motion, you bind the man's hand to the chopping block. You give him a chance to speak, a prayer, a curse, a last word. Then you raise the blade and bring it down. Clean cut. No second strike today. You always feel relief when it's clean. The man screams, of course. They always do. You apply pitch to the stump to stop the bleeding. Then someone else, the bailiff or a clerk, reads out the official proclamation. The crowd applauds. And you go home with the sound of it echoing in your skull. But that's just your morning. Because you also maintain the instruments of death. Gallows ropes, wheels for breaking bones, iron cages for public display. Each device has to be cared for like tools in a craftsman's shop. You oil the axe heads. You reinforce the trapdoor hinge. You test the tension of the noose with weights. Because failure during execution isn't just embarrassing, it's a sin. You're supposed to offer swift justice, not a spectacle of suffering. Still, spectacles are what people crave. Tomorrow, you'll oversee a hanging. Next week, a heretic is due for burning. You've even been called to quarter a traitor once, drawn and dismembered with horses. That one still makes your stomach knot. The screams. The blood. The looks on people's faces, not horror, but fascination. You wonder sometimes if you're the only one disturbed by all of this. Historians still argue whether medieval executioners were feared or pitied. Some lived in isolation, outside city walls. Others had homes, families, even students. A few were surprisingly wealthy. After all, you get paid per job. Sometimes with coin. Sometimes with the clothes of the condemned. Morbid, yes, but practical. But there's a catch. You're needed, but never welcomed. You can't go to church easily, your hands are unclean. People cross themselves when you pass. Tavern keepers serve you from a distance. Women don't speak to you unless they must. You are a pariah with a paycheck. And yet, without you, justice stalls. The law demands blood, and you're the one holding the blade. There are moments when someone thanks you. A noble, perhaps, who appreciated the dignity you gave their condemned cousin. Or a priest who mumbled a blessing after you made the end quick. Those moments are rare. You treasure them like gold. At night, you sharpen your tools in silence. You whisper apologies into the dark. Not to the dead, they're gone, but to yourself, for surviving. Sometimes you dream of other lives. A cooper, a baker, a teacher. Anything less soaked in blood. But in this world, somebody has to do the worst jobs. And for all its horror, yours is clean in its clarity. You deliver what the law demands. No more, no less. The condemned walk up the scaffold. You do your job. And then you walk down again, into shadow. The bell rings low and long. You hear it from across the village, where the smoke rises steadily from your fire pit. The moment it tolls, your stomach twists, not with fear, but anticipation. Because today, you're the sin eater. No, not metaphorically. You're not a priest or confessor. You're the one who sits beside the dead and quite literally eats their sins. It's not glamorous, and it's not holy. In fact, the church condemns it entirely. But you do it anyway, because someone has to. And because families pay, in coin or bread or ale. Usually not much. Just enough to survive. Your job begins where others end. Once a body is washed and wrapped, once the prayers have been said, if there are prayers at all, you're summoned. They place a crust of bread or a piece of meat on the chest of the dead, and you, well, you eat it. You chew slowly, swallowing not just the food, but symbolically, every transgression, lie, and impure thought the deceased may have left behind. No one speaks while you do it. And no one makes eye contact afterward. You're a walking vessel of corruption now, a breathing sponge of others' sins. Which is why people look away when you pass, why they whisper that you're cursed, or worse, untouchable. You wipe your hands on your cloak and nod politely to the family. No one thanks you. No one ever does. Still, there's a strange reverence to it all. Sin-eating has been around for centuries, practiced in dark corners of Europe, especially in the Welsh and English borderlands. Historians still argue whether it originated as a pagan holdover or a poor man's theology, something desperate people invented when the priest was miles away and time was short. Either way, it stuck. Just like the sins do. You trudge back to your cottage, which is always a little apart from the village. Just far enough to keep your shame from rubbing off on the neighbors. Your fence is mended with twine and hope. Your garden sparse but stubborn. Inside, the air smells of candle wax and old onions. You light a fire and sit down to clean the pewter plate you carry with you. The one used for bread on the belly rituals. You scrub it until your fingers ache. But no matter how clean it looks, you always imagine a residue, greasy, unseen, left behind. Sometimes the local priest stops by, usually to grumble. What you do is unholy, he'll hiss, pretending he didn't once send for you when his brother died in the middle of the night and no absolution could be had. He drops a silver penny and leaves in silence. You wonder what happens to all those sins. Do they settle in your bones, a little more weight each time? Or do they simply drift, like smoke, into the air? You haven't grown horns. Your teeth haven't blackened. But something inside you feels changed, like your dreams are foggier, your laughter quieter, your appetite stranger. And still, you return to the deathbeds. Sometimes, it's not bread but a bit of ale or cheese. Once, a boiled egg. One family placed a honey cake on the chest of a child and wept while you ate. That one haunts you most. You've developed rituals of your own. You always sit on the same side of the body. You hum under your breath, not a hymn, but something older. You sprinkle salt around your boots before you begin. It probably doesn't do anything. But it helps you pretend. There are benefits, in a way. No one robs your house. Children don't throw stones. They fear you too much. Superstitions keep you safe, even as they isolate you. If a plague comes to town, people will whisper that you caused it, sure, but they'll still call you when their sister dies in the night and the priest is away again. And you'll come. You always do. The food never tastes right. Bread on a corpse picks up a chill that no fire can bake out. You chew mechanically, thinking of apples and honey to distract yourself. It doesn't work. You once tried to keep track of the sins you absorbed. You thought, if you knew them, they'd weigh less. You wrote them in a ledger: adultery, thievery, murder, envy, pride. But the book filled too quickly. You burned it after a dream where it whispered your name. You wonder sometimes if you'll need a sin-eater of your own one day. Probably not. People will be too afraid. Your sins will be left untouched, wafting up from your cold chest into the rafters. But that's okay. You've eaten enough forgiveness for 20 lifetimes. Maybe, in the next world, that buys you a quiet place. You lie down by the fire. The embers crackle low. Outside, the bell tolls again. Another death. Another meal. And you rise. The streets are muddy again. Not because of rain, but because of blood. You're the barber surgeon, and the war has come closer than usual. You didn't train in any university. Your tools are kept in a wooden box that once carried apples. You wear a stained apron, not a robe. And no, you don't just cut hair. That's the side hustle. Today, you'll be sawing through a man's thigh before noon, setting a soldier's shattered arm by mid-afternoon, and perhaps, if time permits, lancing a festering boil the size of a quail egg before supper. Barbers in the Middle Ages weren't just for beards and bangs. They stitched wounds, drained abscesses, removed lice, and pulled teeth with pliers that hadn't seen hot water since Pentecost. You were cheaper than a physician and more available than a priest, which made you indispensable, and completely terrifying. You wake early, not because you want to, but because someone is already banging at your door. A boy with no front teeth, lost, ironically, to your own tongs, says a farmer's wife has cut her foot on a scythe, and the bleeding won't stop. You grab your satchel, a bone saw, your razor, a strip of linen that used to be part of a nun's habit, and a flask of something that calls itself alcohol. It burns, so it's good enough. The house reeks of blood and onions. The woman lies pale on the straw mattress, her foot dangling off the edge like a broken turnip. You don't ask for details. You've seen worse. You rinse the wound with vinegar and slap on a poultice made of moldy bread and herbs you barely remember the names of. She screams. Her husband turns green. You stitch the gash, tell them to keep the bandage dry, impossible, and accept a loaf of stale bread as payment. By midday, you're back at your stall. You shave the local reeve, who mumbles about tax collection between winces. Your hand trembles slightly. Maybe from the morning's adrenaline. Or maybe from something else you haven't acknowledged, like the slow realization that you might be hurting more than healing. A night servant comes running. Sir Bernard's wound is festering. Of course it is. You cleaned it 3 days ago with wine and hope. At the manor, Sir Bernard's leg is black from calf to knee. You suggest amputation. He suggests stabbing you. But then the pain hits, and suddenly the sword goes down and the hand comes out. You bind his arms and pour the contents of your flask over the leg. He passes out before you make the first cut. You do it fast. You've done this before. The saw shrieks against the bone. His blood is thick and smells like rust and rot. You cauterize the stump with a heated blade, and when he wakes, he vomits on your boots. Success. The steward gives you a coin the size of your thumbnail. You add it to the pouch with your other earnings, a bit of string, a beetle someone gave you for luck, and a broken pipe. Later, a monk comes to your stall. He has a growth. You lead him behind the curtain, examine the boil, and lance it with a flick of the wrist. He doesn't scream. That's rare. You respect him for that. Your tools. They're never truly clean. You wipe them on your apron, sometimes dunk them in vinegar, but deep down, you know you're spreading just as much infection as you're treating. You've seen too many people die after your visits. Too many eyes glaze over mid-bandage. Still, they keep coming. People don't understand that you're a hybrid, part healer, part butcher, part psychologist. You listen to people weep while you sew their flesh back together. You listen to confessions that aren't meant for the ears of men, let alone barbers. Sometimes, after a day like this, you sit by candlelight and inspect your hands. Calloused, stained, nicked. They've held lives in them. And they've lost them too. You light a pipe, exhale smoke through the hole in your crooked tooth, and stare at the flame. You could have been a farmer. A blacksmith. But fate gave you a knife and a stool. And blood never sleeps. Tonight, someone will knock again. Maybe a baby with a fever. Maybe a knight with a bad conscience and a stab wound to match. You'll go. You always do. And in the morning, if no one's died, you might finally get to cut someone's hair. It starts with a whisper. A neighbor mutters something at market that sounds a bit off. A woman skips mass 3 Sundays in a row. A man's bread doesn't rise, and suddenly the town wonders if it's witchcraft, or worse, heresy. That's where you come in. You're the heresy sniffer. Not an official title, mind you. Technically, you're just a low-ranking assistant to the local inquisitor. But everyone in the village knows your job, to listen, to spy, to remember. You're the eyes and ears of the church in places where the church doesn't have eyes, or patience. It isn't a glamorous job. It isn't even paid half the time. But it grants you something that peasants crave almost as much as food, protection. Because if you're the one doing the accusing, it's harder to be accused yourself. This morning, you pretend to buy onions at the market while eavesdropping on 2 old women gossiping over dried fish. One of them swears she saw a black cat sneak into Father Aldrich's chapel. The other says that's nonsense, but she did hear the miller's wife chanting something strange in her garden. You nod to yourself. The miller's wife. Again. You note it in your mental ledger, miller's wife. Third report. Suspected charms. Watch closely. You walk past the apothecary's shop, peering inside. He's always been a bit eccentric. Talks to his herbs. Claims his tinctures are blessed by saints. Saints with unpronounceable names, usually. Might be nothing. Might be everything. Your job isn't to judge. That's the Inquisitor's task. You just gather the threads. Quietly. Carefully. An invisible net cast over the town. And you don't work alone. There's a network of you now, sniffers, informants, whisper catchers. Some do it out of zeal. Others out of fear. A few for revenge. You once received a report claiming a widow was consorting with demons because she wouldn't marry her neighbor's brother. You wrote it down anyway. You've learned to tell the difference between superstition and something darker. But that doesn't always matter. The church has rules, yes, but fear has its own logic. This afternoon, you visit Father Aldrich. He's young for a priest, with clean hands and eyes too soft for this work. Still, he reads your notes, frowns, and folds them into his cassock. The bishop arrives in a week, he says. We need names. You nod. Of course. The bishop brings his own inquisitors. You don't want them sniffing around where you already have your nose. Better to handle things in-house. By evening, the wind picks up. You walk the perimeter of the village, cloak pulled tight. Someone has left offerings at the crossroads again, chicken bones, wildflowers, a clay doll with ash for eyes. Pagan nonsense. Or maybe just a scared mother trying to save her sick child. You collect the evidence, wrap it in linen, and mark the spot. Tomorrow, you'll question the herbalist who lives nearby. She'll claim ignorance. They always do. But the marks on her door, scratched symbols, barely visible, tell a different story. Later, by candlelight, you reread the day's notes. Most of it is noise. Old feuds. Petty jealousy. Superstitions handed down like heirlooms. But some of it chills you. Like the shepherd boy who swore he saw a woman walking on air. Or the blacksmith who says the crucifix in his forge keeps turning upside down. These things don't just unsettle you, they haunt you. Because what if they're true? You've seen strange things. A woman who spoke in tongues while bleeding from her eyes. A child who recited forbidden scripture in perfect Latin, though no one had taught him. The inquisitor said it was hysteria. Or possession. Or lies. But you were there. You saw. Sometimes you wonder if you've sniffed too deep. If watching for heresy has opened you to something darker. You haven't slept well in years. Every dream is smoke, fire, and screams. You remember the first person you named. A kind old man who read too much and spoke too softly. He vanished after questioning. His house stands empty, windows like dark eyes that follow you when you pass. You told yourself it was necessary. And yet, sometimes, you walk past that door and whisper an apology. Tonight, you meet with another sniffer. A boy no older than 15, sharp as a blade, heart hard as frost. He tells you a widow has been meeting travelers at night. Foreigners. Possibly Cathars. Maybe just merchants. He isn't sure. You thank him, give him half a loaf of bread, and tell him to keep watching. When he's gone, you sigh. Every time you recruit another pair of eyes, you wonder, are you keeping the village safe, or feeding the fire? You've seen what happens when the inquisitors take over. Trials with no defense. Torture under the guise of divine will. People confessing to impossible crimes just to make the pain stop. And you know that one wrong whisper, one misplaced word, could put you on that list too. Because you've read things you shouldn't. Kept books you should have burned. Questioned doctrines in the silence of your thoughts. The only thing keeping you safe is how useful you are. The moment you hesitate, or hesitate too obviously, you'll be the one on your knees, begging to recant. You walk home under moonlight, the wind colder now. Somewhere in the hills, an owl screeches. You clutch your satchel tighter. Inside your cottage, you light a candle and open your journal. Not the one for the church, the other one. The hidden one. You write. Day 428. I no longer know what I believe. I know only that belief is dangerous. And disbelief even more so. You close the book and tuck it beneath the floorboard. Then you kneel beside your bed. You don't pray, not really. You speak the words, but your mind is elsewhere, thinking about the miller's wife, the crossroads doll, the upside-down crucifix. You wonder who will be next. You wonder when it will be you. And most of all, you wonder whether truth even matters anymore, when fear is the only gospel anyone listens to. Sleep doesn't come easily. But then again, it never does.